All right, y'all. Welcome to the Unphased, Unedited podcast, where we're providing commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm here with Dr. Lisa. How are you?
I am doing well. Happy to be back on this podcast. My pronouns are she, her, and as Dr. Gold just said, I am Dr. Lisa Ringerfield. So,
Awesome. Well,
should we,
let's get into phase one, right?
yeah, I totally made a mistake. This is so funny because we're like not editing this, right, people? So
Yes.
let's roll with it. Yeah.
Well,
Um,
let's tell the people how all of this happened and why it took so long, right? I mean, it's been a minute.
it has been a minute. I think it's 10 months. If you listened to our teaser episode, you would have heard a little bit about this. But yeah, when Shaunna and I, left our prior producer. We had grand plans to be back within 90 days, and then we began to investigate what it takes to produce a podcast and research producers, and we did interviews and life happens and all of that, and suddenly we found ourselves 10 months later. And we are back, but we are deciding to go it alone, no producer. We're doing this unedited. We are going to be raw, and you're going to get all the good and all the mistakes. So hopefully it'll be a fun ride.
Absolutely. Well, and Lisa, I love that because yes, we're going without a producer, we're going on our own. And at the same time, we can't say that we didn't do our due diligence in trying to find a producer that really checked everything off of our list in regards to what we wanted. And so now I think we kind of stumbled upon a format that actually mimics our values, which I'm actually very proud of. It can seem like, oh, well, we didn't find a producer. Maybe we found our values, and I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah, me too. And I think that sometimes when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we monitor ourselves. We sometimes
Mm,
don't dip our toe in because we're scared of what we might say or how it might be interpreted.
hmm
And, that prevents us from moving forward, I think, in
hmm
friendships, at work, in life. So, you
Yeah,
know, this is an opportunity for Shaunna and I to, well, throw our whole selves into the
right,
swimming pool.
right.
Um, and we will stick to our values of like muddling through it. I mean, what is it you
hmm
say, Shaunna? Fail forward? Is that how you
Yes,
talk about it?
yes. Fail forward, absolutely, fail forward. And so, with that, I think what's really interesting, one of our uh, principles that we want to hold to in this format is that we want it to be accessible. We wanted this to be kind of a flow where we have 3 10-minute segments to get you started thinking about a particular topic. And these particular topics may be linked, they may not be linked, they may be sequential, they may be random, whatever. But we certainly will be touching upon 3 phases. And I will say, Lisa, this first phase of the first episode of Unphased Unedited actually does link back to the original Unphased podcast and how we developed
Yes, it does.
initially. Do you remember the back and forth that we had with our producers around something that seems very simple, but it ended up being very complex, which is our avatar? So, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, or even if you go to our website, unfazedpodcast.com, you'll see the caricatures of myself and Lisa. And I remember the first version of that. I can't call anybody out. I don't want to call anybody out because, frankly, I just don't remember who created the cartoon. Okay, let me just put it that way. But what I do remember is that we had a back and forth around skin tone. And Lisa, it was not about your skin tone. It wasn't about how peachy you were or not.
Nope.
You remember when we were kids and
Right?
you get a crayon and use peach? We weren't
Yep.
talking about how peachy you were. We were talking about what what shade of brown should work for me because the first version was a darker brown than what it is currently.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
remember sending it over to a good friend of mine saying, does this look like me? Because I don't think this looks like me. I think the face looks like me, but the shade is something's off. Something's off. And you, in a separate conversation, said something similar. You were like, that's a few shades off. And then it became this entire conversation where we lightened up the brown of me in that cartoon after a couple of times going back and forth. And now, Lisa, we see The Rock is going through something similar, right?
Yes, he is. Yes, that was a recent news piece around his, I guess, his avatar, his wax avatar at Madame
Hmm.
Tussauds in Paris, right? That he has critiqued them for misrepresenting his skin color. They were lightening it in this case. Is that right?
That's right. They lightened him quite a bit. And for anybody who's a rock fan, you know his features. I mean, he's a huge guy. He's, I don't want to say retired. I think he mentioned he's not retired, but a former active wrestler. He's still a bodybuilder. He's a co-owner of the XFL, all these different things that connect him to athleticism. We know his body type. We know his facial figures. But most people also know that he's proud to be of mixed heritage, specifically African American. I believe his father is African American. And so, given that, to see the skin tone that clearly is not his probably was a shocker to him, to his fans. And I've noticed when he connects with folks, public, private, what have you, he's a very kind guy. And so he didn't blast them for the wrong shade, but he did make it clear that he needed to work with them to revisit skin tone. And so to me, I thought that was really fascinating because, Lisa, you've mentioned this to me before around the inability of many white folks to see variance in brown shades, which I thought was such a fascinating statement. I'm thinking to myself, it's clear that ain't him. That's clear that's not me. But to the white gaze, it all looks the same, it sounds like, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so this issue is colorism, right? And it manifests itself
Absolutely.
in different ways in different communities, and so that's what we want for you to think about. How might that be happening for you, right? Or how might you have engaged in colorism unintentionally in your time? And I
Mm,
think we've got two examples here. One where Shaunna was represented much darker, right? Like all
mhm,
African American or people who identify as black are just dark, right?
mhm,
And then
mhm,
with The Rock, it was a whitening. Um,
mhm.
and
Yeah,
so I think your point about the white gaze, right? Like
yeah.
what does whiteness do to representation? How do we white people minimize,
Mhm,
wash over, dilute,
mhm,
right? Or
mhm.
concentrate, I guess,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
color of a person's skin based on our our imagination, maybe.
Well, Lisa, hold on now. We have okay, we have my example, we have the Rock's example, and then more recently, I think I sent over to you the clip of the video of NFL Hall of Famer Shannon Sharp being turned into this meme. I mean, we laughed so hard when we saw his completely inappropriate makeup that he had on for one of his shows where he was an analyst for. And what I thought was so interesting, again, within this same vein of colorism, he talks about his very dark shade of skin naturally. And he gave the whole backstory of course, if you're on television, you wear makeup. Obviously, that's a no brainer for most folks here that understand TV production. But in this particular case, the makeup was so thick. He even jokingly said that the makeup artist took out a butter knife and slathered it on his face. It was so heavy, right? And so when people showed the clip or the meme of him, I mean, he looked good as far as his attire. He always looks clean. I mean, he looks really good. But his makeup was clearly uh, too heavy, a shade off, lightening him just a touch. And again, I'm thinking to myself, the majority of people that I know who are of African American descent, even if you went on Black X, Black Twitter, any Black social media sites, they immediately picked up on the inappropriateness of the shade of the color of the makeup. Fortunately, he was able to laugh about it. But as he's telling the story, he's talking about he had a new makeup artist that was doing his makeup for the first time. He never mentioned the racial background of the makeup artist, but I would
Okay,
be
that was going to be my
willing.
question. Yeah.
No, I know. And so I was willing to like bet my next paycheck that this was not a black person that did the makeup, right? Because it was so far off. Again,
Mm-hmm.
going back to what if this person was a non-black, probably white individual who, like you mentioned, cannot see the various shades of blackness, brownness, and went in and did this makeup, so much so to the point that now Shannon Sharp, who's dedicated his entire life to being a pro athlete and now, is an analyst, is being mocked because of the color that she or he placed on him. Then I think that's when things get really interesting. So we've got at least three examples of
Yeah,
colorism
we do.
recently
Yeah.
that makes
You
it
know, and I
clear.
wonder if that makeup artist was white, is white. Um, it's
Hmm.
this allergy to acknowledging race, right? Whereas I'm just thinking from a kind of
Yes.
logical standpoint, okay, you're doing makeup, right? You want to find a foundation or a cover or whatever that matches the color of the person's skin.
Yes.
And maybe they're like so concerned, right? They're just, fumbling around what color rather than just saying, hey, we've got this color selection here. Like, what do you think matches your skin the best or whatever, right? Like, just I mean, that's feels
Hmm.
very, you would do that probably for a white person, right? Like, so it's not any different. Depending on that person's shade of their skin, you're finding something that is the best match. It's just, so I do wonder if it's wrapped up in that, oh, I can't talk about race when
Yes.
race
Yes.
isn't white, right?
Well, and here's my other piece too, is that again, we cannot act like Shannon Sharp is in the minority when it comes to the field of being a pro analyst, especially in football. There's countless men of color, black men specifically, that are athletic and analysts. So it's not like you would ever show up to that type of job as a makeup artist without a lot of different shades of makeup. So it's not like he's one of several.
Right, right.
One of a few. He's one of many that have a number of different shades, especially black men in particular. And so, how the hell she came up with that shade? Whoever it is, I'm saying she. I may be wrong, so let me correct myself. How in the world did a makeup artist show up and not give them the option? Kind of playing the guessing game. And Lisa, to your point now, I'm wondering if the makeup artist was like, I think I know what's best for you. I'm just going to put this on and we're going to fly with it. And then it ends up being the wrong shade. Mm, major colorism. And it goes back to, I love your language of imagination. This person couldn't quite accurately imagine the actual color of this gentleman. And so now he shows up and he's a laughing stock on TV because of their inability to be aware
Mm-hmm.
of the racial colorized differences. So it's a shame. It was funny at first because at least he could laugh at himself about it, so he did not take
Right.
it as heavily. But when you think about it in the grand scheme of colorism, problematic, problematic. So
Okay, so we don't have time to go here, but you just made me think of
mm,
the ways in which makeup has been used in a racist way, like minstrels, right? Thinking about that and like caking on
yes,
this makeup that is not representative of a person's skin color, but is that this idea of what a black person looks like, right? Through the
hmm,
lens of whiteness. And
oh,
so that I wonder how much that was playing with that. I feel like it's a whole other phase
it
conversation.
is. Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
but
Oh,
that
let's
just
put a
yeah,
pin in that one. That's good. Yeah.
yeah.
The, and even is makeup correcting using the white lens?
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
We
Okay.
may have to go there too, right? But
We may have to go there.
ooh, ooh, yes, that's a good one. So, all right, so that's phase one, y'all. The Rock, me, Shannon Sharp,
Yeah.
and colorism.
Yeah. Yeah. All in good company there. Yeah.
Right,
Um
right.
all right. So, shifting gears and moving on to phase two, Shauna and I had a conversation about a training that she was doing for a client um, a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And essentially, I will let Shauna elaborate, but I was dismayed that she was having to teach empathy to this group of people, adults, right? Who I would
Mm,
hope, in my naivety, would already have that down by the time they
mm.
reached their 30s and 40s, but apparently not. So,
Lisa, I remember. So I reached out to you and I was asking about a concept, I believe, in connection to empathy of some sort. And it was almost like, again, y'all, once again, another long text message back and forth between me and Lisa. My first message was, "Hey, Lisa, I'm putting together this curriculum on empathy. Do you know about fill in the blank?" It was almost like the proverbial record scratch where Lisa was like, hold up, forget your question. What? You're teaching people about empathy? Wait a minute. Like it was let's put the brakes on for a second and just let it soak in that we're teaching people how to care about other people. And I'm like, it in my mind, I'm thinking, look, I gotta get this done. I got stuff to do. I've got a to-do list today. But you slowing me down to think about how interesting it was to even go there was really fascinating for me. And so over time, again, and now more than one client wanting training on empathy, it gets really interesting, right? Because we're talking about overall an entire client, all staff. But when you specifically drill down to managers and supervisors who have a power dynamic, actually I don't want to say force, that sounds like too strong of a word, but actually getting them to focus on caring about the people that deliver on the product rather than just the product was really interesting to me because for me, it was almost like a pendulum swung too far, right? Where a pendulum swung towards productivity, maybe we all naturally cared about people, but at some point in our careers and our life trajectory, we swung towards the extreme of now we no longer care about people. We care about getting a job done. And now we're having to centralize, refocus people back on what it means to acknowledge human beings. And so I think part of this is my parent lens coming in, where I have 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, and up to this point, especially middle school, you're teaching your kids how to care about other human beings. In other words, how not to be an asshole, Lisa. Don't be an asshole, okay? Just don't, okay? And so you spend all this time with kids trying to help them to be caring about other people, to not be an asshole. I compliment my son Kendrick, who's 9, all the time about being such a big bleeding heart and just naturally caring about people and their well-being. And then we swing all the way to this point where I'm training grown ass people on how to care about people. To me, that feels like a pendulum swing, Lisa. And that's why I'm like, what the hell are we doing? You were exactly right to pump the brakes on. Have we not thought about how we got so far away from empathy that now we have to swing back? I don't know what to think. I don't know what you think,
yeah.
but it's a pendulum swing.
Right. And another dynamic, wasn't this a precursor to training around diversity and equity and inclusion? And you're saying, well, we can't even get there if people don't
Exactly.
recognize the humanity in others and that empathy piece, which just,
Exactly.
again, this is my whiteness, right? I'm like, that is mind blowing to me
Mm,
that we're talking about that in a room of adults, of predominantly
huh?
white folks. Um,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and
that's right.
Comet, my dog, obviously agrees with me that it is mind blowing, so he's contributing to the conversation here. Um, yeah,
Hmm.
and I think that that highlights a difference in our lived experiences, right? And the ways in which I,
Yeah.
as a white person, might approach things, and you, as a black person, might approach. But then we both are
Hmm.
women, and we've also both been socialized as women. We have that gender lens, but then it what's the word I'm looking for? It splits based on racial socialization, right?
Hmm.
Like, so
Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
it was
Yeah,
a,
yeah.
it slowed you down, sure, but you also were like, well, of course I've got to teach this group of white people to have empathy when it comes to talking about racism. And I'm just like, how do these
Really?
adults not have empathy?
And I, to that point though, I love what you're mentioning because, as a woman, I do care about other people, and I've thought about it as being, whether it's the stereotype of just being a nurturer, or actually being a parent, some of those pieces that kind of weave in, and at the same time, from the racialized lens of I've been in enough situations where people didn't care about my humanity. They don't care whether I get home, dead or alive at night. Those types of things. And so I've experienced enough life in my now 45 years to know that, unfortunately, there are people that have made it very clear that they do not care about certain lives existing. And usually that includes the
Right,
lives of
right.
me, the black men in my life, that they don't care about their lives. And so I've seen enough to prove that people don't have empathy. And so, to your point, you know, so the two things that I'm thinking about is, there's maybe one group of people that says, of course they have empathy. On the other hand, I'm thinking, of course they don't have empathy. Like, it's different extremes, and all the reasons why they haven't or shouldn't, which to me made it very interesting that, maybe there's a third group of people that says, of course I have empathy, but is that appropriate in the workplace due to these notions of professionalism?
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
know.
Yeah. So that's an extra layer. And then you were also telling me about how empathy has morphed to a phrase that could only be dreamt up in the context of business, right? What was that phrase?
Girl, these people have been tiptoeing around this damn word. So we started out with empathy. Then it turned into, you're going to laugh, Lisa. It turned into human centered managing, which is all across lots of different literature. I mean, Harvard Business Review, that type of thing. Yet, ironically, none of us can find a tried and true definition of it. That tells me that's some bullshit right there. The reason why it's bullshit is because it's like it's a comfort word. It's, we're not comfortable with compassion, with empathy, etc. So let's come up with this other approach to managing that's ill defined so that people don't jump ship from empathy. And so it's weird. It's weird. I still haven't
Yeah.
found a definition, and I've been working on this thing for weeks.
Yeah, it's like repackaging empathy into business language that is more palatable, right? Which is just mind blowing because I'm like, it just feels very robotic. Human centered management doesn't feel like it has a whole lot of empathy there,
Look,
right?
first thing I thought, see, maybe I'm just, okay, maybe I am just not academic enough to go there. But the first thing I thought was, why in the world do we have to say human-centered managing? Because who have you been managing all this time? Humans. Like, you're exactly right when it comes to
Yes.
robotic
Yeah.
language, is that, have we gotten to the place where we've gone so far to think that human beings are robots, and so we're going to treat them as such, and we just need this as a reminder that they're human beings? In all this time.
Yeah, that is such a great point. Like, we have to introduce the concept of human centered management because empathy will send people running in the other direction. But you're already a manager and have been for several years. So, yeah, what did you think you were doing then? Right? Yeah.
Well, and see, now I'm trying to think from the resistor standpoint always, of, yes, I understand that they're human beings, but I'm not here to manage humans. I'm here to manage work. I'm here to manage product. I'm here to manage, something else, but I'm not here to manage human beings because I don't want to get into the feelings part. I don't, that's too touchy feely, and I don't want to be in people's business, and I don't want to share my business. So let me just keep managing the product rather than managing the human beings who help us get to the product. I call bullshit on that,
Mm-hmm.
Lisa. I call bullshit on that.
Yeah. Okay, this is like, as I get older, I'm totally moving more in the direction of like socialist thinking around
Okay,
economic exploitation, right? Like,
go for
because
it. Mm-hmm.
in my limited knowledge of Marx and obviously Marxism, but the less Marxist version, socialism, right, is this disconnection between the worker and the product. And what you
Oh,
just said, right, is that if
mm-hmm.
I'm managing the work. I'm not acknowledging the people that make the work. So as a manager, my lack of empathy, my lack of recognition of your humanity is maintaining that disconnection between the worker and the product. But as a manager, I'm also getting paid a lot more, right? So there's also the
That's it.
economic piece going in there, which, you know, I mean, I'm definitely not an expert in these areas, but that feels like a problem, a systemic problem.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Which goes back to another dovetail for another phase is our entire soapbox, Lisa, on exploitation. That's like our new favorite word nowadays when it comes to DEI is
Yep,
exploitation.
yep, yeah,
And what it
yeah,
really means and
yeah,
what it looks like in real time. Real
yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
think I've used that word like more this year than I think I've ever used it in my life. So I'm really leaning into the exploitation language.
look,
Uh,
let me tell y'all. So Lisa sent me this fantastic article that talked about exploitation. And we have been on exploitation for months now. Like we see it in everything, everywhere, all the time since she sent me this article. And not that we didn't see it before, but now we have really strong language to call the bullshit. I think that's why we've been saying it all the time. We see it everywhere now. Everywhere. Yeah. That's our new thing, Lisa.
yes. So shifting gears into phase three, when I think about exploitation,
Oof. Oof.
this is my little choice here is to just touch on the Supreme Court of the United States, which, if you know me,
Hmm.
you know I have a fascination with, but I have been revisiting my academic and social interests in this delightful institution, which I think is highly exploitative in a number of ways, at least many of its decisions are. But we just wanted to flag for our listeners that it's worth paying attention to, right? It's worth paying attention to the cases that are going up to the court and are coming out of the court. The last couple of years have been a banner couple of years, obviously, with the overturning of Roe. We had the student loan debt relief decision was overturned. We've had some gun control laws taken down. We've had some religious rights cases that have been highly problematic for the LGBT community, among others.
Hmm.
And so, this current cycle that we're in, the cases were began in October. They were listening to cases, is going to be just as explosive, I think. So, I just wanted to highlight a couple of cases. And Shaunna and I were talking about this before we decided to record. Then the first
Hmm.
one is just, if you don't know this, it's going to blow your freaking mind, right?
Oh,
So
yes. Oh, yes.
there's a case that's going to come that deals with gun rights and domestic violence. So just quickly, if you're convicted of a domestic violence felony, I think, you are not allowed to own firearms. So someone who was convicted, there's a little bit more detail to that, but they essentially are challenging these laws as unconstitutional, meaning we know that there's a direct connection between the possession of firearms, domestic violence, and intimate partner homicide, right? Like that is well documented. But this person is challenging those laws, saying that they're unconstitutional because they violate their Second Amendment rights to own firearms. This is going to be heard at the Supreme Court, and this is the kicker, folks, right? Is the 2 years ago decision that overturned the New York State or New York City law, gun control law, related to concealed carry, I think, basically said that the law was unconstitutional because there's no history or tradition in the United States of such a law. So when we talk about domestic violence, intimate partner violence, this is where I think I blew Shaunna's head off, is of course there is no history or tradition of protecting survivors of domestic violence in this country, right? So if that is your standard for determining whether a gun law is constitutional, then we are going to have a whole lot more intimate partner homicide in this country. And this is
Yes. Yes.
absolutely mind-blowing to me, right?
Look, Lisa, I have this running joke with some of my colleagues that when I'm in protest of something, when I'm on Zoom, I turn my camera off. I'm turning my camera off. Turn it off right now. This is bullshit. I'm turning it off.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's
you
bullshit.
know, and obviously, y'all, just to be clear, Lisa has a much more expansive and deeper understanding of domestic violence, sexual assault, sexual violence than I do. And at the same time, my very clear logic took me to some very clear questions around the history of domestic violence in this country, which obviously we have a history of violence, period, in this country. But domestic violence being named in what, Lisa, the 80s, which obviously is a far cry from a long history in this country, yet it still exists. So, how can you require a history and tradition of honoring domestic violence when we never have, rarely have, recently have?
Right, right.
That's not going to work.
Yeah,
That's not going to
yeah,
work. So, yeah, y'all pay attention to that one. Ugh,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
like a
so
no
the
win.
the pundits are saying that there's no way the Supreme Court can come down on the side of the defendant in this case because, as soon as there
Right,
is a homicide that happens, right, blood is going to be on their hands, and they do not want that kind of public relations
right.
debacle, among other things, which is a pretty
Mm-hmm.
jaded way of thinking about it, but they're going to tie
Right.
themselves in knots and do some gymnastics to try and argue why this is going to be an exception. So I guess we'll wait and see, right? The other one I just wanted to bring up was there's another case that is potentially going to impact organizations or administrative bodies like the FDA, like the EPA, and their ability to make rules and regulations based on legislation. So, for example, the Clean Water Act right now, the EPA is the body that develops those rules and regulations, and this case is potentially going to throw that out and say that those administrative bodies cannot make rules and regulations, but rather Congress has to legislate all of the rules and regulations. So all of those delightful Congress people who do not
Mm,
have a lot of
mm, mm.
experience and may not even believe in climate change are going to be responsible for the regulations of the laws that they pass, and all those scientists that sit in the EPA and all those other agencies, it's unconstitutional for them to do that. So that's also a joyful possible shift that's going to happen here coming up in this term.
Let me tell y'all something. On the first iteration of Unphased, we had my wonderful close friend Heather, who joined us on the podcast specifically talking about um, the about environment, climate, as it particularly pertains to race and other historically excluded groups. And let me tell you something. That's not going to fly. I would much rather trust Heather sitting in, hypothetically, the EPA as an expert on clean water, clean air, all the things, giving us an A through Z, double A through double Z list of protocols, policies, procedures of how to map things out than I ever would any congressperson, even if they're in my party, even if we are aligned. I still would not trust them to do that because they don't need to be in the minutia of the how. It's one thing to say, let's all have clean air. It's another thing to say how to do it effectively, how to do it with the least amount of harm, and how to do it with the most longevity. Leave that to the frickin' experts. They're experts for a reason. They've got
Yeah.
17 PhDs on the topic, but a congressperson who got
Mm-hmm.
elected is supposed to know, even down to the minutia. That's just not possible. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan, Lisa. I'm just not. I'm not a fan.
No, no. I think this is not going to go the way I would like it to. So, and
No,
it's not just the EPA, right? We're talking about every administrative body that kind
FDA.
of
Mm-hmm.
implements um,
Mm-hmm.
the laws that get written. So this is going to be a pretty far-reaching decision. So I'd encourage folks to
Scary.
pay attention to that. The
Scary.
last one that we wanted to mention was that you probably all heard about the mifepristone case that
Mm-hmm.
basically impacted a person's ability to receive mifepristone through the mail. Mifepristone is the drug that enables a person to end a pregnancy, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously with so many states now after Roe versus Wade was overturned, people not having access to like surgical abortions,
Mm-hmm.
that mifepristone via mail order, which has been approved by the FDA for 20 years. But what do those scientists know? Judges know better, right? Than the
Right.
scientists. Judges, of course they do.
Right.
So I have clearly am not understanding the fact that judges also have these PhDs in science, but there you go. So that has not yet been at the Supreme Court, but the prediction is it will land there this session, and so there will be a ruling on the constitutionality or the legality of sending mifepristone by mail for people who are pregnant and want to terminate their pregnancy. So that just feels like a very big, horrible thing that is looming too. So even if you do
Oh,
not pay that much attention, pay attention to this.
oh my God. Well, and I'm grateful that you brought this up because I do think it's fair and important for all of us to be aware of these SCOTUS hearings are coming up and doing what we can to pay attention to that rather than looking in retrospect later, like, oh, I could have said, I could have whatever, and didn't, even at the SCOTUS level. So I appreciate that piece. And, I think for me, what's really important about the strategy piece is yes, I do still keep hope alive, but yet at the same time, when hope dies, I also want to know what should happen next and how should I function next. So, we can go as far back in the summer as affirmative action and some others where we were anticipating these things coming down. And so therefore folks were already strategizing what to do if and when they did come down and not in the direction that we hope. And so it's all about preparation at this point, given that we need to think about the fork in the
Yeah.
road and what could be the final decision. So,
Yeah.
well, clearly, Lisa, we're not going to run out of content for this doggone show because this stuff keeps popping up and deserves
Yes, it
our
does.
attention in a way that's more focused, more knowledgeable, being aware. So I appreciate you bringing those SCOTUS hearings up because I hear at least like five more episodes and everything that you just mentioned right there, right there. So, well,
Yeah.
given that
All right.
this is our first episode of Unfazed, Unedited, which I literally cannot believe, Lisa. So 10 months, long time coming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yep.
where can folks find us now that we are rebranded, unedited, we're all over the
Mm-hmm.
place? Where can they catch up with us?
Yeah, so we are on YouTube. As Shauna mentioned at the top of this discussion, we have a YouTube channel that is unphased, unedited, and you can find that without the brackets around unphased, I believe. It's
Hmm.
easier to search for that way. And then that
Yeah,
is where we'll post all these videos. And then we're also on Instagram, Unphased Pod, LinkedIn, Unphased Pod. And then we have our website, unphased.podcast.com, where we will be posting the audio for this with show notes and a transcript and everything. And that will eventually filter into all of your podcast feeds. We're still figuring that out, but that will happen at sometime soon. And then you can also email us at info@unphased.podcast.com if you have comments, questions, or topics you would like us to discuss.
awesome. And look, make sure y'all go out there and look at this gorgeous website that Dr. Lisa put together for us, unfazedpodcast.com. It is so clean. You can find all of the previous episodes and information about where we're going next. So please keep visiting that for updates as we continue to change and move things around. But that's going to be kind of the landing page where you can find all things unfazed, unedited. So if you liked this week's episode, like, subscribe, leave a review. Let me tell you, I sent Dr. Lisa a link. This was about a week ago about the top 10 DEI podcasts that I didn't even know existed, y'all. Didn't know that this list existed. And the way they get to the top 10 is having lots of great reviews, right? So help us get there. Help us get there. Share this with friends, share it with coworkers. We realize that y'all use our podcast, the video or the audio, as professional development, free professional development for your staff or your colleagues. So please share it with them or others in this phase of your life. But until next week, see you soon.
All right. Bye, everyone.